Just thought I'd sort of kick off with a bit of background before we get stuck into the presenters. Naturally, there's been a lot of focus in the last 6 months and longer on what the government and business are doing at a national level to tackle obesity and diet-related disease. But there's been less coverage of what can happen at a local level. So today we're going to be hearing from Brighton about their attempts to harness the interest in sugar to help meet their health aims locally, but also from Jamie Oliver's team, who with Sustain are hoping to harness this enthusiasm and momentum for action on sugar, hopefully learning from Brighton and learning from other local approaches around the country to see if there's a way of putting this together to something that can be more than the sum of its parts. First up, I wanted to give a little bit of a context about why we're organising this. My name's Ben Reynolds. I'm from Sustain, the Alliance for Better Food and Farming, and we're one of the founding members of the Sustainable Food Cities Network. This now has 43 different localities on board, each with its own local food partnership, bringing together different stakeholders from public sector, private sector, community groups, local voluntary sector groups as well. And in each of these partnerships, they cover a breadth of different issues, from food waste through to food poverty, community food growing, trying to work with local suppliers, working to improve food enterprise or improve public sector procurement, a whole range of different things that affect the local food sector. And importantly, with all of these partnerships, they've created an action plan about what they're going to do to try and improve that food system. I think the majority of those who are joining us today are already involved in one of these local partnerships. If you're not, then go to sustainablefoodcities.org and get involved in your local one. Or if you don't have one locally, maybe think about joining up with other folks locally to start one up. We're organising a series of webinars coming up on a range of different issues that are relevant to these local food partnerships. So this includes one on food poverty, which is coming up on the 3rd of March. Again, go to the sustainablefoodcities.org website to register for that. And do sign up to the Sustainable Food Cities newsletter for more information on these and also other news stories and events run by the local partnerships to find out what's going on all around the country. So why sugar? I wanted to head off one debate that may come up today. I don't think there are many people, particularly in the health movement, that consider that sugar is the only thing to blame for unhealthy diets, but rather that the focus is a useful hook into other issues. When we talk about action at a local level, about vending machines and checkouts, this shouldn't be about swapping chocolates for crisps. But rather about tackling junk food as a whole and ideally ensuring that healthier, sustainable alternatives are easily accessible, affordable and well promoted. And we've been hearing from many local partnerships and other local public health officials who are thinking similarly, who are asking about what is happening in Brighton, who are thinking how they could use this interest on sugar to help achieve their health priorities locally. So this is why we've organised this webinar. But why now? We thought that by now the government's childhood obesity strategy would be out, and that we'd be discussing these local approaches in the context of a plan for national action. This hasn't come yet. We understand it's going to be 4 weeks away. It's always been 4 weeks away for the last couple of months. So that's the only thing I can say with any sense of certainty. Whatever does come out in the strategy, it won't replace the need for local action. And I'm aware that many of those listening in are working day in, day out in your local area on issues around sugar and more broadly around improving health. And we'll have many useful experiences, both of solutions and barriers that I hope we can draw in, both today and in what develops next, including people like Food Active, I think, are on the line, who have been developing a local authority declaration on healthy weight. And there are many others who have joined us who've got great schemes they're doing locally that I hope you can post in the chat, post links to in the chat box, which is off on the left-hand side. Before I hand over to Joe and Harriet, who will kick things off, just a few bits of housekeeping. So this webinar is being recorded, so you can listen back to it later via the Sustainable Food Cities website, or indeed forward a link to it to other people who can't join us. The format of this webinar is that after the presentations, we'll have a Q&A and we'll be using the chat box throughout. So please do use the chat box. I think a few people are posting stuff in there, to ask questions of both the speakers but also of the attendees. Speakers will answer the questions during the Q&A at the end. Use it to raise points, share links to other useful projects or things relating to what you're hearing. I'm aware, lots of you guys are working on these issues, so you've got as much useful information to share as those who are talking. And do use the chat box to raise technical problems. Elise from Sustainable Food Cities is online, and she'll be helping to advise on these and advise on what to do. So some of the common problems that we sometimes get on these are people saying they can't hear us. I would recommend logging back in or trying to re-register through the link on the Sustainable Food Cities website. So register on there and then log back in. Don't try phoning in. There is sometimes this option to phone in. It's an American-based program, so phoning in usually doesn't work unless you're in America, of course, and often it is very expensive. One other issue that sometimes comes up is problems from council or public sector networks where their firewalls won't let you log in. If you have the option to log in via a non-public sector account, i.e. your home one or in a local cafe, you might find this is a good way to get around it. But without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Joe and Harriet, who are going to kick off with telling us more about Sugar Smart Cities.
Hello, good afternoon. Hello, Ben, and hello, everyone else who's listening in. Very excited to see we've got people from Prague, Milan, Newcastle, Hull, and welcome to everyone. I'm here with Harriet Knights from, we're down in Brighton today. I work for the Jamie Oliver Food Foundation, and Harriet is working for Brighton and Hove Council. I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey. I've worked for Jamie Oliver for 10 years, and it all started here. Do you remember school dinners? Do you remember that fresh-faced lad who launched himself onto our TV screens as the naked chef and then decided to tackle school dinners? He used to dress up as a vegetable a lot, and we started a campaign about school dinners. We did fairly well. We certainly made an impact, and we, through the school food plan and various other things, we've seen a huge change in the standards of food fed to our kids. Fast forward 10 years, and we suddenly turned around and looked at the world and realised that actually things were getting worse, not better. And I think Jamie became increasingly aware of these really terrifying statistics. 42 million children under the age of 5 are either overweight or obese, and now, across the globe. And currently we're on a trajectory of 60 million by 2020. 41% of people are going to be overweight or obese by 2030. For the first time in human history, more people are overweight than underweight. This has made us really start considering the double burden. And I think as a foundation and our campaign, more and more we are looking at the double burden. And you'll hear us talk about the double burden over the next year as our messaging continues out. Children today are going to live shorter lives than their parents. Now, obviously, that is a general statistic. That's not each and individual family, but that's fairly shocking when you consider all the advances that have been in medical research that actually obesity is going to reduce our children's lifespans. And then we've now got to the point where the average child eats its own body weight in sugar every year. You guys know about this stuff, but we became really more and more concerned as an organisation. I think Jamie felt with his growing notoriety, I mean, he obviously is a household name now. I regularly get in a cab and the driver says, "What do you do?" And I say, "I work for Jamie." And that's all I have to say. Everyone knows who Jamie is. People listen to Jamie. And he really feels this responsibility. As he's grown up himself, he's a father of 4 children. And he really feels a responsibility for how far he's come, how well known he is around the globe, but actually the fact that he really wants to make a difference. We all know who the enemy is. One of the enemies, Coca-Cola, soft drinks companies. We believe now that the average teenager, about 40% of the sugar they consume comes from soft drinks. And if you look at these, where Coca-Cola how much money they are planning to invest in these countries over the next few years, you suddenly realize how big the problem is. It's a massive challenge. Obviously, Coca-Cola isn't the only part of this story. I mean, it's all kinds of foods. It's all kinds of hidden sugars. But we decided as an organisation that it would be good to look at soft drinks, because actually that 40% figure is something that, if we could draw people's attention to the amount of soft drinks that their kids were consuming, if we could turn that trajectory around, then actually we could have a big impact quite quickly. Again, look, we started looking at the UK. Jamie makes documentaries for Channel 4 television. He does. We classify them in two different ways. We classify them as Chop and Chat, which is the annual cookery show that he does. So we've done all kinds of cookery shows over the years, ranging from Save with Jamie, where he gave you lots of money-saving tips, to Comfort Food, where it was lovely, gorgeous food that people could indulge in. But we also have a history of making hard-hitting campaigning documentaries. We've done, over the years, we've made things like Foul Dinners, which was about the chicken industry, and we have made things about pigs. Save Our Bacon was one. But this time around, we decided that we wanted to look at sugar. And this was why Jamie started meeting people, and he started hearing, the facts about 7,000 amputations every year because of type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes cuts life expectancy by approximately 10 years. We've just hit the point where 4 million adults in the UK have it, and approximately 600,000 don't even know they haven't been diagnosed yet. So it is, these kind of statistics really made Jamie feel he wanted to do something. I think actually, for me, one of the most terrifying ones is the fact that in the last 15 years, the rates of diabetes have doubled. Now, obviously, some of the reason for that is that people are much more aware, and they're probably getting tested more, and they are being diagnosed where they weren't. But we are seeing a massive, massive uplift in this really chronic and life-changing disease. Obesity obviously also is causing other, Cancer UK are reporting that obesity is increasing your chance of getting cancer. We already know that obesity can lead to strokes and heart disease. So it isn't all about type 2 diabetes. I think Jamie really started to feel that that sugar and diabetes were too important to ignore, and also the fact that the NHS is put under such extraordinary burden. Now, actually, the statistic of 24 billion a year, it's 10 billion that is, or actually I think it's 8.8 billion is directly paid by the NHS to treat type 2 diabetes. But there is another layer of costs, which is to do with the amputations, and it is to do with the cancer. And it is estimated now that 20% of the NHS budget goes on obesity and diet-related disease, most of which is preventable. Oh, hang on, sorry. There we go. So a similar thing. We think it's the tip of the iceberg. We firmly believe that an awful lot of people don't know they're at risk and don't yet recognise that they have it or they're pre-diabetic. Globally, the figures are really terrifying, and I think it's important at this point to recognise that we are operating on different levels within the foundation. We have we're operating We're looking at the international level as well as the UK. So in the UK, we've got to this point. 1 in 5 children go into primary school obese or overweight. By the time they leave primary school, they go into secondary school, it's 1 in 3. It's shocking, and it's something that we felt very strongly we had to do something about. This clip, I'm not sure, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to play these clips, but basically these facts and figures led Jamie to wanting to make a documentary called Sugar Rush. We made it last year. It transmitted in October, and it led to a couple of things. I hope that we'll be able to circulate this link to you afterwards and you'll be able to watch the clips. It's a fairly hard-hitting, shocking documentary. It's identified many different things that were happening, that our children's, how many children were being admitted to hospital each year to have their teeth removed, multiple teeth extraction. That was one of the things that came out that was incredibly powerful. And also Jamie visited diabetics and spoke to diabetics who were on the amputation wards, who had suffered either digit loss or limb loss. And the resulting film, I think, was watched by about 1.5 million people on Channel 4 and it transmitted, and it's been watched on catch up and downloaded, and we've had various screens ever since. So it was a very hard-hitting moment. At the end of the film, we did 2 things. During the making of the film, Jamie decided that he wasn't going to wait for the government to act. He, at this stage, firmly believed that fiscal policy and fiscal measures were the only way forward, and that the government should introduce a sugar tax on sugary drinks or drinks with added sugar. He did it in his own restaurants. We have had that levy in place since October, and the money that's raised from that levy goes into the Children's Health Fund. Now, the Children's Health Fund is totally independent to the Jamie Oliver Foundation. We felt that setting up the Health Fund as an independent organisation, which it's run by a board of experts who independently decide where the money is going to be spent, and Sustain are administering that fund. Since we launched, these other labels have joined us. Leon were on board from day one. Fantastic partners, and we were also delighted to welcome other big brands, and we currently have about 150 independent restaurants who've also signed up and joined us, ranging from big famous chef restaurants to little cafes, all of whom just want to make a difference, just want to help us get the message out there, and we've been delighted by the response. We hope that it continues to grow. But that was one of the most important things that Jamie did as a result of the documentary. The other thing we asked was that we asked people to sign a petition. The night the documentary went out, we crashed the government website. We were delighted. Actually, interestingly, if the government website hadn't crashed, we probably would have got triple these figures. But we had 150,000 within hours. The 100,000 is the benchmark, at which point you force a debate in Parliament, allegedly. What in fact happened was it's not a debate in the main hall of Westminster. It's in Westminster Hall, which is different to the obviously the main what you call the Central Parliament building. But we forced that. The other thing that happened that was really interesting was that the Health Select Committee set up an investigation to investigate the evidence. And Jamie was invited to go and give evidence to the Health Select Committee. It was a seminal day for us. It was a real moment Jamie rocks up to the Health Select Committee. He gave a dynamite performance. I mean, he put the argument so clearly. Again, I hope that these links can be shared with you afterwards so that you can watch some of this footage. But he really called on the government to be big and bold and brave. He really demanded everyone's attention and went through his points and his strategy. We got a huge amount of coverage in the media, and we were delighted. The moment that I actually sat in that room and the moment you felt a shift of opinion was when he produced some bottles that we'd mocked up around labelling. We feel very strongly that one of the problems with people with sugar consumption in this country is that people don't necessarily know or want to read the labelling that's available, the information that's available to them. Quite often it's in tiny print on the back of a bottle, and if you're like me and need reading glasses nowadays, you're not really going to get your reading glasses out every time you want to have a look at a label. So actually we feel quite strongly that a clearer, stronger front of pack labelling on soft drinks, really highlighting the amount of sugar that's in the bottles or in the cans is an incredibly important part of the strategy. We mocked these up; these were stuck on. But when we showed these labels to the committee, I think it was when the penny dropped. It really felt that there was the moment they went, "Oh, it's simple, it's clear," and that was quite a big game changer, I think, for us. We still have a fundamental. This is Jamie's TED Wish. He stood up in front of, he gave a TED talk a few years back. And it's important, this is the fundamental thing that we do and we strive to do in the foundation. The word sustainable, the word movement. Sustainable is this isn't going to happen. We need to, whatever we do as a foundation, we have to have a long-term strategy behind it. Movement. That is because we really believe engaging with people. We really strongly believe that it's communities pulling together, all doing a little thing that will make a big difference. And obviously, we want to use food to inspire families to cook again and to empower people. I think very much what we want to do is if you give people the right knowledge, more often than not, they will make the right decisions. And I think that's fundamental to everything we've been doing over the last couple of years. So as a foundation, we've come up with 5 objectives. We've set ourselves these objectives. Change public attitudes and habits. Work with multilateral organisations and start to drive global change. Now that's very much about our international advocacy layer. And in order to achieve that, we're going to have events at the World Health Assembly in May. We're working hard to set up a summit in Rio just before the Olympics. All important. We've identified the key priority countries that we want to work with. All that's great. But we also believe that when you work on a local level, that's when you see change happening the fastest. Truth is, we need the international legislation. We need a framework convention on obesity and global health. But it will take a few years for that to happen. What can we do now? We can work now. And I think that's where Sugar Smart Cities came in. We have aligned ourselves. With all these different organisations. I think it's been the first time that we've done that, and I think a lot of people have been doing a huge amount of work in this area for a long time. But pulling together and being a united voice, we now, when we write to government, we write letters with all these signatures on the bottom. And I think that is really important in terms of getting ourselves heard and really cutting through and making a difference. Jamie has released his own version of the Childhood Obesity Strategy. Came out last week. This is a pictorial look at what it says. It's about 10 pages long, the long version of it. We have presented it to Mr. Cameron with okay, Mr. Cameron, this is what we think you should do. Up the top, you'll see the sugar tax. We do believe in the sugar tax. We, alongside Sustain, who've been doing some fantastic campaigning for many, many years in this area. But we do believe that fiscal measures are important and have a place in this campaign. We also believe in reformulation. We believe that it's very, very important to get businesses and the food manufacturers to address how much sugar is in foods. Labelling, I've talked about already. The fact that we want to see teaspoons or much clearer, much better clarity, things that people can instantly look at and understand and help them make better decisions. We do believe in food education. We will continue to encourage schools to teach children as early as possible about food, how to grow it, where it comes from, the effects it has on their bodies. We're also campaigning hard about marketing. That's marketing on TV. So getting a watershed in place that's works for much earlier. At the moment, the watershed. At the moment there are regulations around children's programming, but what about X Factor? What we all know that families sit down to watch X Factor together, and at the moment there's absolutely no restrictions there. So we're looking at that, and then obviously we're also looking at supermarkets and how often it's sugary foods that are given the price promotions, or often it's 2-for-1 deals, and it's the most unhealthy foods that you find in having those promotions. So we're looking at that. So this is our strategy, but we're really interested in actually trying some of this stuff out for real. And I was absolutely delighted when we connected with Brighton Council. Brighton Public Health called us, we met with them, and we realised that they had some really exciting plans, and they had a vision for doing something across the city. And we see this, what's happening in Brighton, is very much taking our obesity strategy and actually putting it into practice, actually launching it now. We're not waiting for the government to come out with their strategy. Brighton and Hove Council probably, they came to the party, they were incredibly enthusiastic. They'd already decided they wanted to do a health initiative. They wanted to do it around sugar. I think fueled by seeing the Sugar Rush documentary, it really focused us all on the urgency of it. And together with the Brighton and Hove Food Partnership, who are a very strong, very well organised and great food partnership, they're already operating in this city. The three of us have been working together for the last 4 months, and I'm going to hand over to Harriet now, who can give you more detail about what's been happening in Brighton.
Okay, thank you, Jo. Okay, so yeah, my name is Harriet Knights, and I work in regulatory services at Brighton and Hove City Council. My role on the whole is to deliver healthy catering initiatives, and I mainly work with commercial food businesses in the city and coordinate a Healthy Choice Award. But I've also been part of a fairly small team working to develop the Sugar Smart City initiative, working with Jo and others, including the Food Partnership. I'm just going to briefly talk you through our approach, why we're focusing on sugar, and how it fits in with some of the other work we're doing, and also some early progress and lessons learned so far. So, healthy weight and good nutrition is identified as one of the 5 key priorities in the city's current joint health and wellbeing strategy. Food is also one of our 4 domains of our Healthy Weight Programme Board, and the board brings together a range of partners which meet and oversee the action plan and generally support the healthy weight agenda in the city. I've included a bit of data on the slide from the most recent update of the National Child Measurement Programme. And this basically just shows the prevalence of child healthy weight. You can see we're doing comparatively quite well in Brighton and Hove. And in fact, the local prevalence of overweight and obesity across all ages in the city is better than the stats that Jo mentioned earlier. But given that 1 in 4 of our children leave primary school already overweight or obese, and and the fact that the UK has one of the highest rates of obesity in Europe, we certainly can't be complacent in the city. And just going on to the next slide, obesity in the city is also strongly correlated with inequalities and deprivation too. So our priorities going forward focus on collaborative working to tackle influences that contribute towards obesity, so looking specifically at the environment around us. In the past, the Public Health Department have run citywide debates exploring different issues, and it's a way for us to increase local insight but also inform our services going forward. We've run debates about parenting, alcohol, smoking, and there was definitely a desire to do something similar around the local food environment. I was going to talk a bit about timing. From what Ben's already talked about in terms of sugar, the role of sugar in tackling nutrition more generally, and some of the things that Joe's already talked about in terms of health impacts of sugar intake and our increase in consumption and everything like that. I probably don't need to go into this too much, but last summer, 6 months or so ago, when we first started planning the debates, sugar was becoming a particularly timely issue. So I think it's probably suffice to say that we kind of kicked off this work within the context of all those discussions, the reviews and the reports that were coming out. And before I move on to talk a bit more about our approach, another point that I wanted to note is that we also had a very small budget for this sort of work. So there was a need for us to be quite creative in how we approached it. There was a need for us to prove there was interest on a local level, to prove that there was a need locally to do something around sugar or the food environment. And there was also a need for us to collaborate with others to drive forward our work. So this slide basically just gives a bit of an overview of where we've gone to date. We started Sugar Smart, as I said, with a debate, and the aim of that was to raise awareness of sugar in food and drink, and also to ask residents whether we should take action on sugar and how best we could do that. I suppose we set out to really just raise the issue of sugar, increase awareness, particularly around hidden sugars, and also ways people can modify their intake of sugar. As I said, we wanted to obtain residents' views on how and where sugar should be targeted, for that to eventually inform our Sugar Smart City Action Plan. We wanted to engage local schools and food outlets and retailers and others across the city early on. So we wanted, as Joe said, to take a whole city approach. And we wanted to raise some local debate actually as well around the idea of a sugar levy or a sugar tax. I think, I would say overall we probably achieved most of those things in where we are so far. So in terms of how we approach the debates, we use a kind of a variety of different methods. We used an online survey. We had a shorter postcard survey like the one you can see here. We ran focus groups, did targeted events, and we had a media and social media campaign going on as well. The short postcard survey, for example, went out across the city to GPs, pharmacies, schools, outlets, wherever basically people could access it publicly. And we also specifically sent a batch of surveys out to food outlets for business owners to answer and send back. The longer online survey asked the same questions that you can see here, but also many more. And that was promoted via stakeholders and partners, via social media, etc. And we received a good response to the surveys. As I said, we delivered lots of events. So during October and November, we coordinated a live youth debate, school-focused events, sessions with outlets, and they all received a fairly positive turnout. I'll just give you a bit of information about a couple of those. The youth debates, so the way we did that, we posed a central question and audience members, which were predominantly young people, but also included some of their parents, teachers, etc. They were encouraged to ask questions, make comments, and we had an expert panel which included food business owners, catering managers, head teachers, nutritionists, some of whom I think are tuned in today. And we filmed the event and invited local food bloggers as well to come along and cover it, to sort of raise the profile of that event. And then the school event that we ran during November, I believe, teachers were invited to hear about various food education programmes on offer to Brighton and Hove schools. These include activities that our own public health schools programme deliver. We were talking about the Kitchen Garden project, which is offered by Jamie Oliver Foundation. We were also talking about support for school breakfast clubs that the Food Partnership offer as well. And that event was actually really successful. We're running another event in the coming weeks as well. And then, as well as those sort of wider higher profile events, we ran some small semi-structured focus groups with parents and of other groups as well. It's all to try and gain insight, really. The debate, we achieved great press interest, actually, both locally but also nationally. And I think that was, very much in line with the fact that we had this relationship with Jamie Oliver Foundation and Sustain, and we were one of the things we were talking about was the promotion of the Children's Health Fund and the voluntary sugary drinks levy as well. But we had, as you can see from the slide, our colleagues were involved in interviews on the TV. We had articles in the Independent, the Guardian, as well as local papers as well. But alongside that, there was a lot of activity on social media with people using the hashtag #SugarSmartCity. And there was a lot of conversation and reach generated from those means as well. Overall, that campaign really helped us raise awareness of the debate, and also helped us promote the survey, for example, and get a bit more insight from residents. So just to briefly touch on what the debate actually found, you'll see some of the stats on the slide here. 81% of survey respondents reported that they are concerned about sugar. The majority of these said their concern was rising. We asked about which foods and drinks were of most concern, and the top three that ranked were cereals, processed foods, and soft drinks. So that kind of really highlights that those areas of hidden sugars and everyday foods are also of concern, as well as the more obvious culprits of the sugary drinks. The majority of respondents said they would like to reduce their own intake of sugar, and when asked what would help them, the most common answer was more information to help me spot the healthier options. And finally, a really good number, 82%, agreed that we should take more action in the city to reduce sugar intake. Again, we asked about which areas we should take action in, and all of the areas that we talked about received high support, to be honest. But the ones that came out on top were availability of healthier options in food outlets, and also secondary schools doing more to reduce sugary drink intake among their pupils. So we also asked about actions primary schools could take in terms of healthier snack policies, etc. And all of those measures actually received a lot of support. So our next steps really are, now we've come to the end of the debate and we've kind of kick-started the whole process, is to finalise our citywide action plan with all our partners, agree priorities, and then also communicate this back to residents, really. At the moment, we're looking at our overall aim of the plan will be to reduce sugar intake across all ages, and hopefully contribute towards improvement in healthy weights and dental health as well. We're going to use the key tools that I've outlined on this slide, and we're going to continue to work in a range of settings, including education, outlets, catering, venues, local authority settings, of course, healthcare and leisure, and also retail as well. And we've already made some progress with some of these settings, so I'll just run through some of that. So far, about 20 primary schools, there's 48 in the city, have signed up to the Kitchen Garden project, which is a food education scheme coordinated by Jamie Oliver Foundation. 30 schools are also receiving sugar smart assemblies, and we're offering challenges in schools. We're also beginning to do some work in secondary schools and higher education settings, trialling student engagement events, etc. In terms of work with food outlets, around or over 50 outlets have made or are making sugar smart commitments. And this is going up all the time, and it includes some really key players in the city, such as the County Cricket Club, the Dome, the Pier, the universities, but also various smaller independent outlets, cafes, pubs, takeaways, etc. And the commitments that they're adopting include the Children's Health Fund, the Sugary Drinks Levy, promoting free drinking water, offering more healthy options, but also reformulating their dishes to reduce the sugar content, and then more generally promoting Sugar Smart for us, and training their staff to understand more about sugar. So there's a wide range of things that people are doing in the city already. And just finally, just to cover a few of our sort of key lessons learned, and if anyone's got any questions, please do come back to me. Communication was one that I picked up on. I think the debate for us was a really key part of the process. It was important for the media and others to understand that that was the immediate priority before we start taking action, before we commit to action. So that, I think being clear when you start this kind of campaign that's the way you're going to go about it is really important. Developing partnerships for us is really important. The relationship with Jamie Oliver Foundation has been really important in terms of maintaining momentum, and also generating profile. And the food partnership is and will be a key delivery partner as well going forward. So I think in terms of just our three organisations, and there's many more involved, I think the strengths and the strengths that we all bring will really hopefully drive forward this agenda. The Children's Health Fund, that is something. There has been some traction among Brighton independents in terms of the Children's Health Fund and the levy. There's a couple of early success stories and case studies that we've got out of it. I'm really confident that we will sign up more, but it's definitely not an easy sell. It is a bit of a challenge. And what I would say is it's really important to work within the context of the outlets in your city or in your borough or in your area, and offer a range of options for commitments they can make. For example, in some of the more deprived parts of the city, even with the best will in the world, outlets are reticent to put their prices up anymore. And we fully understand that. So if there's something we can do which will help them, which will suit their context and their environment, then we'll do that. And it can be as simple as just promoting the fact that they sell water. But that said, I would say don't be afraid to be ambitious and take on challenges and do things differently. For example, I think there's the one outlet, the Pier, might not be a really obvious choice for a Sugar Smart initiative, as it's sort of synonymous with the chips and ice creams and sweets and rock and donuts, etc. But we are working on some really interesting things with them, and I think the main thing for Sugar Smart, in my opinion, is that small steps in a setting like that can make a really big difference. So you have to be creative and look at what you can do. And that's it from me. I'm going to hand back to Jo briefly to finish up.
Yeah, I'm just going to pick up on some of the points that Harriet brought up there. I think that one of the lessons we've learned about the Children's Health Fund is that actually it takes a lot of lead work, and we're going to have to put a lot of effort in going and talking to the small independent restaurants. I mean, people, when they understand it, but they have a lot of questions and they have a lot of anxiety around it when they first hear about it. So we need to spend time with people. And actually what we're finding is that some of the bigger hits, you know, the cricket ground, who are going to introduce a sugar tax across the cricket ground, of course, that's going to get to hundreds of thousands of people. So at the beginning of this, I mean, we really have only been going for, we had a debate in October, November. We then had Christmas. So, I mean, really, we've only been working hard at this for about 6 weeks. And actually having some of those big hits with the big wins, we're focusing on those at the moment because it helps us with the PR. It helps us let people know what's going on. The pier is such an interesting challenge. That is a big stick of rock sticking out into the sea here. It's built on sugar, that business, and but we're delighted that they've come along saying, hey, how can we get involved? Because it shows real willing. We're not going to ask them to stop selling donuts. People come down to Brighton and they go down the pier and they want a donut. That's fine. But if the pier can introduce the sugar tax, or serve healthy children's menus, or start watering the fruit juice down that they're selling in they sell in their cafes, then all those little things will add up to a difference. And it's also about increasing awareness. The sugar tax is so much about, it's as much about increasing awareness as it is about the money that's raised that goes to good causes. One other thing I wanted to mention that we're doing down here in Brighton, and it's interesting because we have we're looking for new ways we're looking for new ways of funding things. We're operating on a minuscule budget down here. I mean, obviously every council in the country is strapped for cash. Every food partnership, you know, where everyone works on a very day-to-day basis. And we don't have any huge budget to throw at this. But one of the things we've been doing is looking at knocking on doors, new doors. And one of the ones we knocked on was Brighton College. Now, Brighton College is the posh independent school down here. It's highly acclaimed. It does incredibly well in the league tables. But it's also a charity. And as such, they need to be seen to be doing things in the community. So I went knocking on the door of Brighton College and went, oi, don't fancy doing something with this sugar smart stuff, do you? And they went, yeah, we'd love to. How can we help? I said, well, how would you like to do some fundraising and support the 48 state primaries across the city and pay for the Kitchen Garden Project, which is our digital food education project. It's 400 beautiful lessons and recipes that can help teachers to deliver food education. And Brighton College bit my hand off. It was really interesting because actually for them, they are a charity. They need to be seen to be doing things. They are a school that pride themselves on teaching the kids that they have a responsibility to give back to society. So they saw it as a great opportunity to do that. And they're also, interestingly, they're now looking at training some of their sixth formers up to go and do community work and support some of the most deprived schools in the city and support the teachers in the lessons. So it was a new way of approaching something, and we're really looking at those. We're going to be talking to lots of businesses here, lots of companies that are based here, and trying to involve them, trying to get them to do things. I mean, because we can't afford to pay for all this ourselves, so we need to get other organisations to look at themselves and go, what can I do? And if we get a big company to start teaching their own workforce about sugar, that's great. You know, it's a big win for us. These are the areas we're working in. These are, we've identified these areas. I mean, Harriet's covered a lot of this already. We're beginning to work with health and hospitals, looking at vending machines. As we know, in every A&E across the country, there's a vending machine full of sugar. And of course, in a lot of hospitals, the staff, after 6 o'clock when the canteen's shut, the only option they have is turning to vending for sustenance through the night when they're doing long night shifts. I think the NHS have already recognised that they need to do more to support their staff, but we're talking to the hospitals down here. We've talked about the sports, the cricket ground, and we're also working with Albion and the community. The seagulls are an important part of life down here in Brighton, and they have community programmes, so we're working with them. Secondary schools, it's setting up screenings of the documentary and the Sugar Smart assemblies. Primary schools we've talked about in terms of the Kitchen Garden Project and we're looking at lunchbox policy and things like that. Parks and Leisure, spelt wrong, apologies. I did this slide in a hurry just before I came online. So, but Parks and Leisure, we're looking at, how can we get water back into our parks? I mean, I think one of the reason you go down the skate park here, and actually you suddenly realise the reason the kids have all got 2-litre bottles of Coke or Fanta is because they haven't got access to free water anymore. Retail, we're talking to the supermarkets, we're talking to the independent shops down here, just asking them, will you consider rearranging your fridge? Will you consider putting different labels and some marketing, talking to people about sugar? Interestingly, I had a fascinating conversation with one of the shops here, and I was like, well, why do you get up every morning and put that fizzy drink sign outside your shop? And he said he'd been doing it for 5 years, because 5 years ago, someone from Coca-Cola came down and paid for the awning on his shop, gave him a free fridge, and ever since then he's been putting the signage out. But actually, there's no contract, there's no reason why he's doing it. It's and when I started talking to him, I think he suddenly, there was a light went on. A lot of people do things out of habit, and actually when you question them and you start telling them about how bad the fizzy drinks are for the teenagers, suddenly he doesn't want to, so it's been really interesting just talking to people. Tourism and iconic buildings, I mean, that's really important down in Brighton. Obviously, different communities have different things. I mean, in Brighton, we have over 1 million tourists visit this town every year. So it's an important thing here, but actually, it can, across the country, it can be museums, or it can be public buildings. But we're focused on places where people go and hang out. So what are we doing down here? Well, the whole point about what we're doing in Brighton is a pilot. We've never worked together before, and we're planning. I mean, it's been an amazingly fruitful and exciting time for us. But our real plan is to grow this. So over the next few months, we will take the lessons from Brighton. We will write them up and hopefully create a framework. And we're looking to spread them out to other places around. We're hoping to launch Sugar Smart UK, where we have a clear framework that other cities will be able to come on, embrace, and learn from our lessons, use our materials. With Sustain, we're hoping to launch a website where a lot of the materials that we've used and grown in Brighton will be accessible, and we hope that we can create some kind of a scoring system where cities can obtain stars, or to help them monitor the progress they're making as they go Sugar Smart. These cities have all run me up already, and we will. This is just a list to show you that these are people who just called out the blue. I think there will be huge national interest as we grow. But that's our plan. Our plan is to use Brighton as a pilot, Brighton and Hove as a pilot, and then from this create something that we can roll out across the UK. I think that's about it. Oh, here we are. We're still going to dress up as vegetables. We have an annual day every year called Food Revolution Day in Jamie World, and we will be using it this year in many ways to support Sugar Smart City. It's been 10 years and I still dress up as a vegetable. My teenage daughter is more and more embarrassed as each year goes by, but we will be still using events, still doing things to get that press, get that publicity, and get the message out there.
Thanks a lot, Joe. I'm going to have to wrap it up there because we have very few minutes left for questions, and there's been lots of great questions coming in. So I'd really like to get to bring in Victoria Lawrence, who's involved in public health in Brighton and Hove CCG as well, to answer some of these questions. Victoria and Harriet, you may well have seen in the chat box some of these questions coming through, but just to fire a few of them over to you, and hopefully Elise will tell me if I'm wrong here, but hopefully we'll be able to carry this webinar on for an extra few minutes to make sure we can run through all of these questions. Just to go through them in pairs. Megan from Portsmouth was asking whether there's any way in which we can affect billboard and bus stop advertising on junk foods, preventing adverts on school routes. And Mary from Aberdeen was asking whether there's been much work on vending machines, particularly in public places where they are a key revenue generator, and also work on trying to swap to low sugar options. I think this is something that Brighton and Hove Food Partnership are doing some work on, particularly in Brighton and Sussex. Chloe Clark, I think, is attending this, might be able to post some more information about the work they're doing in the chat box, or perhaps Harriet and Victoria can say a little bit if they're involved. Do you guys want to sort of kick off with those two questions? And I've got a few more to sort of follow up with in a second.
Yeah, sure. It's Harriet again. Just to pick up on the first point with billboards and bus stop advertising, etc. I think that's a really good point, actually, and it would go sort of hand in hand with other work that we're planning to look at in terms of influencing the food outlets on routes to and from schools, for example. I think one thing I would say that, as well as looking at whether there is scope to prevent junk food marketing on those sorts of routes, it might be also an idea to look at what we can do to sort of combat messages. So we're doing a lot of work in schools, in primary schools and secondary schools, to provide information, raise awareness, raise knowledge, and we're hoping those sorts of measures will actually help young people sort of reject those messages, I suppose, because even if they're not on billboards, on bus stops, on the rest of it, they're everywhere, those sorts of messages anyway. So I think it's really important that we provide the information to help combat that. But we have also had some conversations with our local bus company about promoting our message on those routes as well. So that's what I would say about that one. I hope that answers it slightly. If I may, Tori, if you're there, would you mind picking up on the vending machine bit?
Yep, I pick up on the vending. We have been in discussion with several of the providers, and we're finding one of the main mechanisms is the Public Health England government and catering buying standards, which has recommendations for what people should have with regard to nutritional content for their vending machines. We have also trialled a couple of healthier vending options, particularly with rude food vending in our leisure centres, which has had some success but doesn't unfortunately create the same financial reward back as the unhealthier options. So we're still looking at running a few pilots with the Freedom Leisure, particularly around whether we can have some more consistent labelling across their vending machines so people are making informed choices. And also we're looking at rolling out a survey across all their members to see what people would actually like to be seen in the leisure facilities.
Thank you, Tori. Just on the advertising point as well, it's worth flagging up. And one of the things that we want to do in following up is, and over the next few months, is to link to a lot of the best practice that's going on around the country on this. And on the advertising front, I know that Birmingham are looking into how they might be able to restrict junk food advertising on the billboards around certain parts of the city. So certainly any progress that they make or any other areas make, we'd be quite keen to share with any of the attendees and anyone else looking to get on this route. Just to sort of flag up a couple of other questions. Robin Ireland from Liverpool was flagging up the potential for increased planning powers as a way of tackling proliferation of junk food. I imagine particularly junk food outlets. And Hilary from Hull was raising around actually I've lost the question, sorry. And Matt Creamer from London was asking particularly a question for Harriet around whether you've been able to use nutritional standards and procurement contracts to reduce sugar in public sector catering. I don't know if either of you are able to respond to any of those points.
This is Harriet again. Just to pick up on the
Thank you. One other question that's come through from Anne in Blackburn, I'm not sure this is something that Jo might want to chip in on as well as you, Harriet. She raised the question around whether you considered encouraging businesses to reduce prices of healthier drinks, particularly rather as opposed to a tax on or implementing the levy on the more sugary drinks. Particularly in those less affluent areas where the businesses might be less likely to increase prices. I suppose this also might sort of tie in to some of your work around access to sort of drinking water as well.
That's definitely something that I've done. In a few examples, actually, outlets have reduced the price of bottled water, for example, to beneath, even something like 5 or 10p beneath the price of cans. But again, it very much depends on the individual situation, because I find, and I think basically what we need to do as well is work a bit more closely with suppliers, because often when I talk to businesses, if they're motivated, they can make those sorts of changes. But sometimes the barrier is that they obviously reduce their margin if they do that, and they can be a bit reticent to do those sorts of things. So it's definitely possible, and that is definitely a really good mechanism. But I think it would be great to work with suppliers, so at the other end of the sort of spectrum, really, to look at prices and availability of healthier products to outlets, so that they can make those sorts of choices in the first place, if that makes sense. Jo,
absolutely. I mean, I think it's very interesting. I think a lot of people, when they've got £1 and they go to buy a drink, they'll tend to spend their drink on a flavoured drink rather than water, because they think they're getting something for their money in a funny way. And I think it's really important, if we can reduce the cost of water, that would be really powerful, because people will see, I can get water for 20p less than the can of Coke. I think it's a really important area for us to work in. We're also, I've been looking to get lists of healthier drinks that are available. There are carbonated drinks out there with no added sugar that would be much better if we can get those out. So I'm looking to get lists of those and just speak to outlets here and see if they'll start stocking those, and stocking them with labelling saying these are low sugar options, so that people realise that they don't always have to go for the very high sugar options.
Thank you, Jo. I had lots of brilliant comments and conversations going on in the chat box. I've got to remember before we close the meeting that I actually cut and pasted a lot of these, so we can share and follow up on some of these great examples of local practice. Interestingly, just returning to the point that was raised by Matt around looking at sugar and nutritional standards and procurement contracts. I think Sue Carmichael from West Sussex is saying that they've woven indicators on sugar reduction into those local contracts. So it would be good to find out more about that and circulate it around to the group. I had a couple of what might be the final questions. We'll see how we're doing for time. That I wanted to sort of, I suppose, to step back and return to the point that Joe made around how you come up with a framework around this that might allow for replicability. Clearly, there's something around having some kind of pledge, and clearly there's something around targeting different sectors within that sort of local area. But a question, I suppose, particularly for Harriet and maybe sort of Victoria as well. Just wondering, how do you get the balance between a meaningful and achievable commitment from a business, so it's not just a CSR or greenwash exercise? So, for example, how do you feel about a hospital improving sugar in its catering if the vending machines are still full of junk, or if there are adverts up for fizzy drinks, etc.? Is there a baseline sort of commitment that you expect from a business, or is there this danger that you have somewhere which is professing to be sugar smart, and yet you're still surrounded by sugary options? Is that something that you've sort of grappled with at all?
Yes, definitely. I think we've definitely come up against some of those issues. I think for us, it's just really important to work with what we can realistically do, and also work in a way which doesn't impact negatively on people's sort of bottom line, for example, as well. So, there's been instances we've come up against, for example, with vending machines where organisations have sort of long-term contracts, so we can't make meaningful changes within those contracts about what's in the vending machines. But what we can do in the meantime is to continue to work with them in the way that they can work with us, and that might be putting up posters on vending machines, for example, changing around the sort of placement of products within the vending machines, or changing products very slightly if they've got the scope to do that within their contracts. Look at pricing perhaps as well. So we're just working within the context of what businesses can do. And I think it wouldn't be reasonable to expect, 100% positive changes where, immediately. I think things take a very long time. And so what we want to do is sort of not scare away organisations, I suppose, go in quite softly and find out what they think the opportunities are and how we can help them meet those opportunities. I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say bring them on the journey. I think most people care about kids, most people care about health, but quite often they just don't know where to start, and they don't. And I think what we're finding is the more we talk to people and we listen. Listening is so important for us down here at Brighton at the moment. It's listening to what are the barriers. And I was at the hospital this morning, talking to them and listening to the fact that they're saying that, in A&E, when people come in and they're having a bad day already, they wouldn't be in A&E if they weren't having a bad day. And sometimes they've been sitting there for 4 or 5 hours, and actually their instinct is to go for to go for a Mars bar or go for something to cheer the kids up. So actually, that's not the vending machine to start with. Start somewhere else in the hospital. Start on a vending machine which is supplying the staff, and then work towards dealing with the one in A&E, because you're going to hit the most resistance in the A&E. And it's really listening to people and working with them and taking them on the journey. And that's what I think is going to work here. And that's where we're going to get the support of the community with us. If we just go in and be the sugar police, we're just going to hit computer says no, and we'll have a lot of closed doors. But by working with people and saying, okay, we get it about the A&E vending machine, let's start somewhere else and come back to that one. And actually, that's the attitude that's helping and working here.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks, Harriet. One last question that I wanted to raise, which I think again comes back to the sort of the framing of the difference that you're making. I found the slides very useful, Harriet, sort of summing up the sorts of difference that you're already starting to see. You're saying about sort of 50 different pledges from different businesses, things like that. Just wondering, is there a different? Do you have a measure or a metric, I suppose, that all these commitments sort of add up to? I don't know whether that's sort of numbers of meals served by caterers who have taken the pledge, or number of vending machines now gone healthy or removed, or is there a? Have you started to think about ways in which you can start turning some of these pledges into sort of bigger numbers?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that's probably something that we're really starting to work on now. That we've come to the end of the debate, and we're starting to engage people. I think terms of, for example, my work with outlets, certainly down the line, we are, all these different kinds of commitments businesses are making are great. We're coming up with some really meaningful case studies, really interesting examples. But what we would like to do is come up with a couple of really concrete commitments. For example, around providing free tap water, and also around limiting portion size of sugary drinks and having other options available. By having a couple of really concrete, distinct commitments, we will be better able to monitor and measure the impact of those. But in terms of some of the wider stuff, for example, outlets reducing sugar content of dishes or desserts, we will definitely look at the footfall, number of meals served, sales data. We're not quite there yet, but that's definitely the direction we would like to go in, so that we can monitor the impact of this. But I think more generally, what we're also trying to do is raise awareness and engage people. So there'll be the slightly less tangible evaluation, but just as important, I think, about looking at awareness and knowledge in the city about sugar, and numbers in terms of engagement. So how many schools, how many outlets in different categories are doing things. So it's very much being worked out. But that's, I think, for in terms of our relationship with Sustain, with Jamie Oliver Foundation, and being a sort of pilot city for this approach, it's very much a question of working out how we do things as we go along. And we're more than happy to share our approach as it develops.
Thank you very much, Harriet. As we bring this meeting to a close, sorry for letting it overrun, slap on the wrist for bad chairing. I just wondered if Harriet or Joe, if you had any last words, any last things that you wanted to say before we finish up.
There is no silver bullet, and this is, but I think that's what's so exciting about what's going on down here. I think the idea that we're looking at this entire community and this entire city and working at many different levels with many, many different people, I think that is, it's exciting. Some things will be more successful than others. We're going to constantly question ourselves and our actions. I think, in fact, Harriet and me have a couple of hours this afternoon booked in to go through our action plans and work out where we should be putting our priorities. We're a really small team working on this. We need to be constantly monitoring ourselves and making sure that the things we're doing are having maximum impact, and thinking about how we can get the message out. One of the things that we need to do, and one of the things that we're not doing well enough at the moment, is we need to work out a PR and a comms strategy so that we can spread the word around this town. We had a lot of press around the launch of Sugar Smart City, but actually we need to keep that PR up so that every person, my aim is that every single person in this city knows it's going on and has been touched by it in some way. It's really exciting. It's a new way of working. It takes a lot of collaboration, and you need to come at it with collaboration in mind. There is no place for egos in this approach. It absolutely has to be who's doing what. Let's just divvy it up and let's get on with it. And so far, it's been an incredibly powerful, informative, and exciting journey.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Oh, sorry, Harriet. Yes.
Just a really brief last point. I think that for us as well, we know sugar isn't the only issue that we need to tackle, but it does seem to be something that really captures people's imagination and people are really interested in, and people have really latched onto it. Just yesterday I was having a conversation with a business, and I hadn't specifically mentioned Sugar Smart in the run-up to the meeting, but I went along and she mentioned it to me. So I think people are starting to hear about it and understand why we're doing it. So I think it's just quite an engaging topic to get people involved in.
Thanks a lot, Harriet. Just to finish up then, and there's a couple of questions. Slides will be available, yes. The whole presentation and the recording will be up on the sustainablefoodcities.org site. That just leaves me to thank Joe and Harriet and also Victoria for talking. Thank you to Elise for helping to set this up. Thank you to all the attendees for joining us. Loads of really interesting points made in the chat box. Lots of useful things to follow up on this. In terms of the next steps around this, do go to the sugarsmartuk.org website. There's a sign up thing there so we can keep you in the loop with how this develops. We're really keen to hear from those of you who want to be more actively involved in shaping this or running local campaigns around this. We've got another workshop which is going to be taking place up in Liverpool next month. There's also been some people flagging up some other useful events coming up, which hopefully you've seen in the chat box. Up in Liverpool on the 23rd of March, around the local authority declaration on healthy weight and other local measures. Also in Redcar on the 20th of April, and also a link to a Fuse event in Newcastle, uniting health and planning. Do have a look through the chat box for the links to those, and hopefully I'll grab those links before we end this meeting as well. That just leaves me to thank you all for getting involved, and do join us for future webinars and other issues, or keep in touch on these. Thank you very much, and see you all soon, I hope.